Hello and welcome to Dirhams and Dollars, the Gulf News business podcast, where we talk about news affecting the business community in the region and in the world. On Wednesdays, we have in-depth conversations on a topic defining the week. You can find us at gulfnews.com, and you can always download the latest episodes from iTunes. I'm Ed Clowes, and I'm joined today by
Jonathan Richards.
And I'm Scott Shuey. All right, as we were sitting down this week to talk about what to talk about on this show, we had sort of a problem. Which one of the global economic crises to focus on? I mean, there's 4 of them going on right now. You've got the streets burning in Paris because of tariffs on gas. You have the Indian government trying to raid the central bank to boost the economy ahead of the elections. You have the ongoing circus that is U.S. politics. But if you're really looking for something great, you really got to look at a country which is actively going out of its way to make its situation worse. And that's sort of what we have right now going on with Brexit. So for those of you who don't know where we are in the news cycle, we are looking at a no-confidence vote in Theresa May in, I think, about 8 hours. Now, if you haven't been following the Brexit, it's...
If you don't know what do you think there's anyone out there who doesn't know what Brexit is?
I'm going to assume for the second
there
might be.
There might be.
There might be somebody out there who's had their head in the sand for the last 2 years. But it's been getting worse and worse. It looks like there's going to be no deal, a hard Brexit, and EU is basically, I think at this point, told the UK, no more negotiation, take it or leave it. Of course, they took it back, argued about it, and now the entire UK government looks like it's ready to fall apart. So Sarah D is out on assignment today, so we thought we'd bring in Richard too. So we have two Brits here to explain what is going on and I don't know exactly how could it be any worse.
I'm as confused as everyone else. I think that's part of the problem. From my point of view, obviously, I've been living in Dubai for 3 years and I've been watching it from afar, and I'm just horrified. I mean, I leave the country for 5 minutes and it all goes to hell.
That's the best way to watch it is from afar, I think.
But I am slowly watching my London property price plummet. And I think that is the greatest concern that most people have now is what is the economic future looking like? And it's looking bleak.
Well, your salary, I mean, just on economic futures of us expats living abroad, your salary is looking better.
That's fine.
That's fine.
That's
house price.
That's petro US dollars pegged to the dirham here, so we're okay.
Yeah. You're going to sell your house for a loaf of bread in about 5 years.
Yeah, that's right.
But the salary will be enormous.
You won't be able to get a loaf of bread in about 5 years. In the UK,
we'll be scrapping over. We'll be fighting the rat that you'll never sit. You're only about 7 feet away from in London for the last potato in the supermarket.
And some medicine.
But yes, I mean. Not to make our British compatriots jealous, obviously, but yes, we do quite well out of a drop in the pound.
Yes.
And that's great for us temporarily. But what are we going to go home to? I have no idea.
All right, well, let's back up a little bit. Exactly. What's the situation now? What are we looking at in the short term? Like I said earlier, we know that the EU has come out and said, here is the terms of the divorce. They've gone back to the UK. There was a big fight in Parliament, or has been going on for the last 3 days, with basically Theresa May trying to schedule a vote to get it passed. If they got it passed, they got a deal. It ain't going to be pretty, but it gets them out of the situation without a hard Brexit. And a hard Brexit meaning they have no deal come March, which means they're in a lot of trouble. I mean, everything from not being able to land airplanes because of lack of international agreements to a falling pound. And instead of passing it, they said, no, we don't like it. It's too much of what the old deal was like. They didn't like the Irish backstop, a number of things. So what is going to happen now? They're going to have a no-confidence vote. What does this mean for Brexit?
Well, I mean, if you knew that, you could probably make a fortune. It's really unclear what it means right now because we don't know the result of the no-confidence vote taking place. But for those who are perhaps uninitiated in British politics, what this is effectively means it's an internal party challenge against Theresa May, who's the Prime Minister, by about midnight tonight Dubai time, or 8 p.m. GMT, we'll have a better idea as to whether she is still Prime Minister. If her party decides that she is done for, then she will exit stage left, and her replacement will come in and will be voted in the coming days or weeks.
All right, let's assume for a second that she gets voted out. What happens next?
Well, the best way to put it is the singer changes, but the song remains the same.
Okay, so we're going from Van Halen to Van Hagar. That's not a good enough.
Right. What we're going from one sort of dodgy deal put in place by Theresa May to another same dodgy deal put in place by her replacement. Really, effectively, the options remain the same. And what we're looking at now is a flow
Well,
chart.
if the options remain the same, then why are they going through this?
Well, because they've lost faith in Theresa May's ability. So, I mean, within the Conservative Party, you have different factions. You have those who believe that a hard Brexit without a deal is the best way forward. You have those who believe that Theresa May's deal, flawed, but the best we're going to get, is the way forward. And you have those who believe that we should remain in the EU and therefore there should be a second referendum where the British people are allowed to choose.
So basically the Tory party, the Conservative Party, has decided to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic after they've hit the iceberg.
Yeah.
And there's going to be no real change in the direction other than the ship's going down.
No, I mean, even if you have a centrist sort of quasi-Remainer come into power following Theresa May's exit, they are still going to be tasked with delivering the mandate of the British people, which was voted in 2015, pardon me, 2016.
EU said no. The EU said that you don't get the mandate of the British people. You're part of a bigger organization. Take the divorce or get out.
No, the mandate of the British people being to leave the EU. So by hook or by crook, the next Tory leader will feel obliged to deliver the will of those 17 million people. And so that leaves them with very few options. That leaves them with either a hard Brexit or Theresa May's deal. As you've already pointed out, Scott, there's no new deal coming. The EU have made that abundantly clear. There's going to be no fundamental change to the deal that May has already negotiated.
All right, so if May's out tonight, hard Brexit.
No. It could still be May's deal, or hard Brexit, or a second referendum.
And therein lies the problem. Because again, if she's voted out tonight, that's it. She can't go forward for re-election again. That's it. She's out. That's 6 weeks of being a caretaker prime minister at a time when Parliament is about to break up for Christmas, and that's quite a long Christmas, by the way. They have those MPs get quite a good holiday, and then it's the state opening of Parliament next year. So then we will have a new leader. Probably, maybe. Again, that's still not actually. That could still drag on for quite a while. And who's that going to be? I mean, hopefully not Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, which would be even worse. Who's that going to be? I can't even see any good contenders, really. I mean, there's no obvious contender that I can actually really think of that the British people would swallow at this point.
Okay, but
so now, and then before you know it, it's February. March is fast approaching when the deadline is coming.
So if she's out tonight and we get someone new in by February, they got a month to pull it together or hard Brexit.
Pretty much, I reckon.
All right. So what happens if she survives tonight's vote? What's the scenario then?
She's safe for a year.
She's safe, but what about Brexit?
Well, Brexit, again, remains exactly the same. She's safe personally for a year. I would say it's a proxy vote on her deal, particularly within the Conservative Party. I mean, the Conservatives are not going to vote to keep her in power, only to then vote against her deal. Although those warring factions that are plotting her coup within the party, the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world, are not going to suddenly, just because there's a vote of confidence in her, decide her deal is great. Yeah, they are still categorically going to vote against her deal when it reaches the House of Commons, as are many, many other people in the opposition, the Labour Party, and the Greens and the DUP and all of the other parties within the House of Parliament. They are going to still vote against her deal. So she could well weather this storm and still see her deal fail when it reaches the House of Commons. As we edge ever closer to that March 29th D-Day, is it March 20th?
I think 29th? Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, as we edge ever closer to that precipice from which we fall into completely uncharted economic and suicidal water.
The problem now is you've got fairly sensible, I mean, if there is such a oxymoron that you could put together, some fairly sensible Tory MPs now who actually fully supported Theresa May. And if you actually read their letters of no confidence to the 1922 committee, they are now very damning about how Theresa May has treated them, the people who actually really fully supported her. And she has treated them very, very badly. So, for example, won the snap election for a start, but also then trying to force things through, like with the Chequers deal, for example, and then slowing things down suddenly, and then forcing things through suddenly, and then suddenly cancelling the vote. And they feel very badly treated and consulted.
Of Parliament. I mean, it's getting ugly there.
Yeah, very ugly.
So, okay, if she gets through tonight, She's still basically, you're telling me, has no chance of salvaging this deal before March 20th, whatever that date is.
There's a chance, but it's a slim chance. And the reason it's a slim chance is because, you know, the deal that she has, and this is why the whole thing is rather farcical, and this is why the whole thing is completely disingenuous from a political standpoint. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, the Labour Party leader, has been saying, I could get a better deal. Many others within the Conservative Party have said, I could get a better deal.
The cheese submarine argument.
The cheese
submarine. For those who read Twitter.
Yes,
you know.
exactly. The brilliant thread by Hugo Rifkind. The reality is that the EU know what they're willing to give up, and they know where the red lines are, and more or less, give or take, the deal that May has is the best one that they are willing to offer. So realistically, she's not going to get any fundamental changes to that deal to take back to Parliament and say, hey guys, look, we got a confirmation or some assurances on the Irish backstop, which is the contentious issue, and please now vote for my deal. She's not going to get that. She's not going to get any fundamental changes. She's just going to get lip service to her deal and to the assurance that the EU will not seek to control that Irish backstop forever.
And in the meantime, obviously it's coming up to Christmas, a time when we all looked for some sort of economic hope for the new year, especially to do with sales and the new year, and we can all have a drink and a bit of turkey and get stuffed, and hopefully the following year will be prosperous.
You're going to get turkey and you're going to get stuffed.
We are definitely going to get stuffed in some way or the other. But again, from an economic point of view, it's the uncertainty and also all these conflicting messages. So, for example, I think either today or yesterday there was an economic report that employment, not unemployment, but employment is the highest it has ever been in the UK. And we're on the cusp of Brexit. So what's going on there? So are we facing economic doom, or actually has Brexit actually made no difference? Then the pound drops and then it rises again against the dollar, and it's very, very mixed from that kind of standpoint.
I think it's fair to say, having kind of observed the last 2 years, and you know, we've seen and heard all of the economic forecasts and both pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit, there is no conceivable way at this point that exiting the EU could be in any way, shape or form better for us economically than the status quo of remaining in the EU. Now, set aside all the political considerations, the cultural considerations, immigration and all that kind of thing, you know, regaining our sovereignty and so on. Economically, it's simply unthinkable that exiting the EU, either on May's deal or in a no-deal scenario, could be better for us than staying in that. It's a flawed institution, the EU. Yeah. It's imperfect. But staying in the largest single trading bloc in the world is better for us than next.
The problem is we wanted our cake and we wanted to eat it. That was the problem. The problem is that we wanted a relationship with the EU in terms of actually some of their legislation, whilst over-bureaucratic, is actually quite good in terms of food standards and food safety, etc. I'm thinking of other things about agricultural kind of projects that they've invested, even in Britain and Ireland, for example. I mean, I know Ireland isn't part of Britain, but it's the EU investment in Ireland saved it in terms of the roads that were built and the connections were built, and that's helped Northern Ireland in many ways
Scotland
as well.
Tremendously.
Oh, absolutely tremendously. Yeah. So there were lots of good things about the EU that were good. Now, I hate the idea of EU in terms of being over-bureaucratic. I hate all the junkets and the gravy train that all their commissioners are usually on. That's not great, obviously. But we wanted to get rid of that, and we wanted to keep the good stuff. You can't do that. And that's what the EU clubbed together and basically said, well, if you're out of the club, you're out of the club. And now that's the consequence we are now having to live with.
Yeah, and they've said previously they're going to, when you leave the club, we're going to make it as bad for you as you can. You don't want everyone else leaving the club too.
Yeah.
And, oh man, that's just, so basically what I'm hearing you two is no matter what happens now, regardless of the vote, regardless of who's actually Prime Minister come February, you guys are out.
Yeah.
There's no going back. And probably, unless, you know, all of a sudden everyone wises up in Parliament, you're out with no deal.
Unless
a hard Brexit.
the
you're
only
looking at
way,
a pound that's parity to the dollar.
Yeah. I mean, the only way now, and I think we were talking about this a bit earlier, the only way now is that from the no confidence vote and a new leader just says, you know what, I'm just going to take the risk. You've put all your faith and trust in me. I'm cancelling this. We are now going to have a second vote. Now, I think that's good and bad. I think bad in that we're going to have to wait even longer for certainty, and that could cause even more chaos. But good in that it at least puts it back in the hands of the British people, who can now actually hopefully make some sort of sensible decision based on actual fact, rather than the lies we were spun and told before, on both sides, Remain and Leave.
I think the Prime Minister, regardless of who is actually in that post comes February, if there's no deal in place at that time, would just be smart to say, you know what, we're canceling Brexit. Not because they really want to cancel Brexit in the long term, but you get out of that, you take the get out of free jail card, which the EU has tossed you, and then you say again, okay, we're invoking Article 50, and then start the process all over again. Yeah. That may have wasted a lot of time and effort, but it gives you another 2 years to make sure you're not exiting with nothing but, with nothing.
I grew up in Britain in the 70s. So I remember the single common market and all the fuss that was around that. And I'm of the generation that grew up with that. And I don't think I've suffered that much for it, to be honest, actually. But we have to remember, this decision now, this year, 2019, will affect an entire generation, if not 2 generations. And that is a big deal. My children will grow up in that environment.
No, they probably won't. They probably won't be able to afford to go back and live there. I mean, some of the I'm serious. Some of the data we've seen, and granted, some of it's scary data, and it may or may not be true. But they're talking about things like 750,000 jobs could be lost in the UK because of Brexit. You're looking at a pound that is on parity with the dollar. Now, most people probably don't realize what that means in terms of daily lives, but basically your food stuff, your house, your clothes, everything, you import just jumped in price tremendously. Not by a small bit, up to 30%, depending on which prediction you look at. You're looking at a country which is going to have a hard time surviving. Going back to the 70s and 80s, the British economy was not particularly in good shape.
I remember the power cuts. I remember the rubbish piling up in Leicester Square. It was terrible. It was,
and a lot of that had to do with the fact that British pound was relatively weak. They're an island economy. You have to import a lot of things, and if you don't have a strong currency, it makes it very difficult. And I think people have forgotten what that actually means to have an island economy and not have a strong pound. And they're going to find out, or they're going to have it brought back up for them in the worst possible way.
Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? The part of the problem now is that from a feasibility point of view, if had politicians been honest and had there been a proper feasibility study, I don't mean a boring feasibility study, I mean a bullet-pointed, this is how it actually will directly affect you, or very probably will affect you. We'd had a much clearer idea about that, but now we've got complete uncertainty, and we're stuck between these stools of, so for example, some of the MPs who have given this no confidence vote, some of the more sensible ones are actually now saying, we as Britain, as Ed is now saying, deserve to be confident. We should be confident, and actually we should have gone into the deal with all confidence. And actually, if it ended up in no Brexit, that should have been it. And actually, our negotiation position should have been much stronger. Why didn't we go to our strengths? And actually, Theresa May went in there with very weak arguments, didn't really push it very hard, and actually bent over, basically.
And by the way to start off the conversation, if the politicians hadn't lied to us.
Yes, if they hadn't. It's almost like an organisation that's facing difficult financial troubles. It is far better to cut back and reinvent whilst you still can, rather than wait, rather than try and deal with the structure and financial situation that you have and somehow cobble along and make it work. That doesn't work. Either we were going to reinvent ourselves like some magical pop star and re-evolve Britain, or we should have just not bothered at all. And actually, had we gone in, as you say, with all guns blazing and actually tried to find an inventive solution from the very beginning, maybe we wouldn't just be negotiating with people who didn't want us when we said we didn't want them.
Yeah. Really missing David Bowie right about now.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we undermined ourselves as well, domestically, the press reports and the constant EU bashing, thinking that they're not reading that in Brussels and going, look at these guys, they're so arrogant and living up to that British stereotype. That's the reality. And I think that as Brits, we have a lot to say that's good about the country and economically, culturally and otherwise. But I mean, the political omnishambles of the last 2 years is
it's a good thick of it quote,
is humiliating, and yet again in this no confidence vote that we'll watch tonight, it is, whenever you listen to this, Wednesday night, it is ultimately a reflection yet again of the infighting in the Tories that has really led to a lot of these things. I mean, even David Cameron calling the referendum in the first place, many say is an echo from his days at Eton, the famous boarding school, with Boris Johnson and that rivalry that they had. I mean, these ridiculous, stupid rivalries date back decades and lead to real world implications and consequences today that mean that the EU funding of, abused women's shelters and orphanages and things like that in Wales, that the EU funds are going to be withdrawn and people are going to suffer. Marginalised, marginalised people who really, really are struggling in today's society are going to suffer even more. And we should have addressed the issues of Brexit first, before it ever got to that point where people protested and lashed out against the elite and against the society that they were living in, that it wasn't working for them. And now May, 2 years later, is saying we need to build a society that works for everyone. But it's 2 years too late.
And again, like all drastic change in life, whether it's organisations or your own life, you have to ask yourself some fairly fundamental reality checks. How is this really actually? You need to imagine how this is actually really going to affect you. And we never really did that. We had all these little myths and these kind of little sound bites that we clung to, and that wasn't really the reality. When I moved back to Britain eventually and I want to go to pop to France, I can't pop to France anymore. I'm going to have a visa.
Yeah.
That's really hard now. I mean, okay, it's not a massive hardship that some of the poor people are going to have their funding removed, but just those little things all add up to making life difficult and a pain.
And imagine if I'm 27, so the vote took place when I was 25, and I felt a tangible sense of like a big part of my future and my status as a European citizen had been extinguished. And there are a lot of 16-year-olds out there, or who were 16 at the time of the vote in 2016, who are now 18 and eligible to vote, and who have seen the damage that leaving the EU will do over the last 2 years, have seen what a utter catastrophe it has been politically, and who would in a second referendum say we need to stop this madness right now, and we need to put it behind us as a national shame and an embarrassment, but we need to stop this right now. And I think there's a lot of old people who probably did vote for Brexit, like my grandmother. She didn't vote for Brexit, but she probably would have done if she was alive, who are dead now and who wouldn't be able to vote in a second referendum. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And ultimately it is those 16, 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds
who are going to live with
will
this.
be impacted,
No,
not the angry 75-year-olds who won't be and are just doing it to sort of reclaim some part of their history that no longer exists.
But see, also, and again, it's quite good that we've got two Brits here with an American in the middle of us, because what hasn't also helped our American cousins, special relationship. Trump hasn't really weighed in like I think Obama would, with some sensibilities, and perhaps calmed everything down a bit.
Calmed everything down? He want crazy talk. Join us back next week when we talk about the indictments. And
he was well, that's the galling thing. He was encouraging it, and then now he's pulling back from it and saying you're a mess and you're alone.
He was saying, look, the deal that May has negotiated sees Britain fall to the back of the list, the list for trade deals with the US. But initially, as you say, when he was asked about Brexit, he was all for it. He was all for regaining sovereignty and all that, even though he doesn't even understand US politics. I mean, how he could understand British politics to make a qualified statement
Did he not realise that we were an island? Yeah, I think it was something like that, wasn't it? I can't remember.
Probably. He just knows he's got a golf course in Scotland.
Yeah, that's probably all he really cares about. Yeah, but I don't think looking at Donald Trump's going to bring you any new level of sanity. Look at the situation the U.S. is in right now, so probably should never expected that. All right, I think on that particular note, we're going to wrap it up for today. Okay, if you're looking to find this podcast, of course, you can always find us on iTunes, and you will be able to find us on Snap also. If you just look for Business Wrap, you'll be able to find us there. I'm Scott Shuey. You can find me on Twitter at Scott Shuey.
I'm Ed Clowes. You can find me on Twitter at Ed Clowes.
And I'm Jonathan Richards. And even though I'm the digital director, I don't really believe in social media that much. But we are on Snap, as Scott said. We're also on Amazon.
Oh,
and
yes.
I think the skill that you need is dollars and dirhams, and you can open it by just saying Open Business Podcast.
There we go.
So yeah, I think that'll be really good, and yeah, catch us there.
Brilliant.
All right. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.